With the Safety On. Written by CallMeIzukuNotDeku. Read to you by Evie is Evil. This fic is rated for general audiences. No archive warnings apply, and the category is Gen. The fandoms for this are Batman all media types. Summary.
Nightwing?
Yeah? The man's voice shook.
Does Red Robin look any younger to you?
No, What the fuck? The four vigilantes stood frozen, watching Tim cough, tearing at his throat. His eyes darted between them.
Help,
he begged.
Please, help me.
Or, everyone is de-aged to the age where they last felt safe. Except for Tim. I wonder why that is. Smiley face. Author's notes. Very happy with how this one turned out. Smiley face. Reader's notes. I see your cheeky little smiley faces. I see what you're doing there. Alright, now on with the fic. Damien did his best to stifle his coughs, willing the smoke to clear faster than it already was. The sudden flash of light, followed by the smoke that he and the rest of the bats began to cough up, only confirmed that whoever they were fighting was a magic user, and a good one at that. Damien stepped back, only to feel a throb of pain in his ankle as he put weight on it. And that was weird, because his ankle healed 2 days ago. That's why he was finally cleared for patrol again that night. Somehow, the magic user had brought back his most recent injury.
Nightwing.
He turned and had to pause for a moment.
You look different.
Maybe a year or two younger than he was when Damien first met him. He heard giggles from the other side of the alley.
Not as different as I would hope,
came the voice of their assailant. Dick narrowed his eyes. What did you do to us?
Nothing permanent.
The young woman ran a finger down the pink stone at the top of her staff.
You've all been sent back to the age when you last felt safe. Change us back,
Damien instructed, drawing his sword.
Oh, I don't think you're in any place to attack me.
She smiled, turning and slowly walking from the alley, shoes clicking. Damien went to follow her, only to find Dick's hand on his wrist. Damien raised an eyebrow.
What?
Look. And he should have noticed much sooner that 3 of theirs were still coughing. Jason stopped first, and when the smoke cleared, Damien saw something odd. He was still in uniform, but it was much too large for him. He was dwarfed by his own clothes, small enough that Damien wouldn't be surprised if the man could fit in his own rendition of the Robin costume. He remembered the last time the boy wore that costume, and pushed that thought away. Bruce stopped coughing not a minute later, and the boy he was left as was even younger than Jason. Even younger than Damien. Damien quickly developed the theory that the longer someone coughed up that white smoke, the further back they aged. But there was one fault in that hypothesis. Drake. The boy who had not stopped coughing.
Red?
Jason called out. Tim continued to cough for a moment, before dragging in a deep breath through a ragged throat and gasping, "Help!" And that sounded too desperate to be Timothy. Too decomposed. It froze them all in place. "I can't breathe," was all he managed to get out before coughing even more. And then Damien noticed something odd.
Nightwing?
Yeah? The man's voice shook.
Does Red Robin look any younger to you?
No, What the fuck? The 4 vigilantes stood frozen, watching Tim cough, tearing at his throat. His eyes darted between them. "Help!" he begged. "Please help me!" He gagged, and only smoke came out. Jason tried to move forward to help, only to begin tripping on his ill-fitting clothing. Dick, in his still-fitting costume, was finally the one who stopped forward. He caught Tim as the boy blacked out and fell. The coughing had stopped along with his breathing, and the smoke that had previously been enough to choke on now drifted lazily from his nose and mouth. Tim didn't look any younger. "Red?" And that was panic in Dick's voice. Damien looked to Bruce for help, but the man seemed a bit lost. "Red Robin?" Dick grabbed Tim's forearm, holding it for a moment before saying, "B, call the Batmobile. He has a pulse, but he's not breathing." Damien had imagined Tim's death many times. He'd imagined slit throats and poisoned coffee and falls from great heights. He didn't imagine one like this, and it never quite occurred to him that maybe he wouldn't be the cause of Tim's death. It was over a year since Damien last tried to kill Tim, but only then did it occur to him that he wanted Tim alive.
"The Batmobile's 7 minutes out. Agent A is preparing the medbay for our arrival."
7? Can you make it go any faster?"
"Not without risking a crash and making it so that we have to walk home."
The knowledge that Tim wouldn't make it if that happened hung heavy in the air. Dick nodded and took a deep breath before lying Tim face up on the alley floor and beginning chest compressions. The smoke came out in small puffs, and Dick stopped every few compressions to check that Tim's heartbeat was still steady. Dick gave no indication that it wasn't, so Damien did the only thing he could and looked away.
"Batman,"
he called out, though it felt weird calling someone younger than himself any sort of man.
"What is our course of action once the Batmobile arrives?" "You, Hood, and I will sit up front with the Batmobile set to self-driving mode. Red Robin will be laid out on the back seat where Nightwing can continue with chest compressions, in the hopes that
Bruce cut himself off.
"In the hopes that Red Robin starts breathing again."
Damien nodded. There was no real work to be done on his end, but having a plan helped soothe his anxieties. "How's his pulse?" Jason asked. The voice was certainly young, but more than that. It wavered in a way Damien had never heard before. "Steady," Dick said. "Surprisingly so." Jason nodded before bunching up his clothes so he could walk and making his way over to the pair. He reached for Tim. "Hood." Dick didn't stop his compressions. "What are you doing?"
"Let me angle him to the side a bit. The smoke's rising. Maybe if we can get him on his side, he'll be able to get some actual air in his lungs."
Dick nodded, and they rearranged Tim until he was angled on Jason's lap, and Dick began his compressions again, noticeably finding minor difficulties with the new angle. And then Tim started letting out small wheezes after each compression.
"The Batmobile's a minute out."
"Oh, thank God." Dick breathed out a sigh of relief. It felt like much longer than a minute before the Batmobile arrived, but when it did, Dick only continued with his compressions. "Robin, can you lean the back seats down so that Red will be at a 45-degree angle?" He nodded and went to adjust the seats. By the time he was done, Dick had Tim in his arms and was steps away from the car. Damien helped make sure Tim's head didn't hit against anything as Dick carried him in and adjusted him on the seat. Damien hesitated for a moment before getting out of the car and slipping around to the front seat. He wanted to stay in the back with Dick, with Tim. Leaving of his own accord was better than being asked to leave. It wouldn't even be a yard away, Damien chided himself. He was making something out of nothing. This was nothing, and this was fine. They were always fine, even if they drove away with the windows open to keep the car from filling with smoke. They didn't know what would happen if they inhaled that, and with the state Tim was in, none of them wanted to find out. Even with the domino, Damien had to close his eyes due to the force of the wind as it whipped through the car. This was nothing. This was fine. They dealt with things like fear toxin and Joker venom often enough that Damien had no excuse to be freaking out over some magic trick pulled by a nameless rogue. He didn't worry about how they had antidotes for things like fear toxin and Joker venom, and how they had no antidote for this. He didn't worry about how they had no idea what came next, and he didn't worry about how they had no way to stop it. No, Damien didn't worry at all. The smoke didn't stop, but when Tim started breathing on his own, it was a great relief, especially considering how the bat ventilator started sputtering and heating up while trying to process the smoke coming from Tim's lungs. "Damie?" came Dick's sleepy voice.
"Grayson?"
"You can go to bed early. I'll cover for you."
"You shall do no such thing,"
he sassed, not taking an eye off Tim's chest as it rose and fell.
"You should be sleeping in preparation for your own shift."
He gave an anxious sigh. "I couldn't sleep."
"You're worried about him."
Dick just sat next to Damien, wrapping an arm around him and laying his head on his own. Damien felt cornered, but he knew such affection helped his brother. So did honesty.
"I'm worried for Drake as well, especially considering his asplenia."
Dick choked on air. "His what?"
"You saw the scar, didn't you? On his stomach?"
"Yeah, but I'm sorry, how did you know that?"
"Splenectomies usually leave rather minor scars, but it looks like he was struck there first, which is why there's a more noticeable scar, due to whatever injury caused him to lose the organ, making the scar rougher, like a lot of his others. He likely didn't think it stood out, thus he made no efforts to hide it."
"Right." Dick took a deep breath. "We'll talk about that later. You said you were worried for him?" Damien bit his cheek, the pain helping him think through his words carefully.
"When it occurred to me that the smoke wasn't stopping for him like it was for the rest of us, I found myself worried for his health in a way I wasn't before. I just realized, Dick, that I don't want him dead anymore."
He felt a light tension dress Dick's frame, dutifully ignoring it as he continued.
For a while, I had been telling myself that I was merely observing him for weaknesses and taking time to plan out my next attempt. Only, I wasn't planning anything. And I think my observing was just my excuse to share space with him. I don't want Drake dead, not by my hand or another's. It only occurred to me while he was dying that I much prefer him alive and well."
"You really wanted him dead?" And Damien knew that voice. It was the voice Dick always used when he forgot the price of Damien's training.
"I wanted to secure my place in this family, and it seemed obvious that Tim, another outsider, had proved his usefulness because he had been allowed to stay. At the time, taking his spot seemed like the most logical course of action. I didn't want him dead, but you saw how he was with Robin. He is not someone who lets go of things easily. Disposing of him permanently seemed like the only way I'd be able to stay. Then you got attached, and I knew that Bruce couldn't make me leave if he wanted to. Your anger is that of legend."
Dick gave a breathy laugh. Damien smiled, feeling safe as he knew no one saw it.
"May I ask a question?"
"Of course."
"Do you think Drake feels like his position here is permanent?"
Dick shifted, leaning up so he could look at Damien. "What do you mean?"
"We all went back to when we last felt safe. I went back to when my ankle was injured. You went back a few years, something which I will question you about later. Bruce went back to when he was a kid, presumably before his parents died. Jason went back to when he was Robin. Tim did not go back to any previous version of himself. If the smoke had stopped, I'd think he'd always felt safe, but it's still going." Damien turned back, needing to check again that Tim was still breathing, and sighing in relief when he confirmed that the boy was. "He didn't get any younger, didn't go back to when he was Robin, or even back before he knew any of us, to a time when he was infinitely safer."
When he looked back to Dick, the man had tears in his eyes. "I don't think I can answer that for you, but we can ask Tim when he wakes up, okay?"
"Yes,"
Damien said, looking away before Dick started crying.
"That works too."
Since Dick stayed with Damien during his time watching over Tim, Damien decided to provide him with the same courtesy. Silently, Jason joined them, his own shift being after Dick's. He didn't stay silent for long, furrowing his brows and asking, When did the smoke turn gray?" "What?" Dick looked back, trying to find the difference. Damien did too, but he had been staring at Tim for too long, and the smoke, if it did get darker, did so gradually so that he hadn't noticed it. He opened his mouth to say so, only for the coughing to start again. Black smoke tore its way from his lungs. He felt Dick's hand on his back, rubbing soothing circles for a moment before he started coughing as well. He heard Jason start coughing as well a moment later, then a fourth cough. Timothy. It had to be Timothy. Once again, Damien was the first to stop coughing. Only this time, he didn't wait for the smoke to clear before rushing forward.
"Drake?"
He copied Dick's movements, placing a hand on the boy's back and moving in slow circles, which was made difficult by how much Tim's body jerked and shuddered with each cough. Tim pushed Damien's hand away, and just as Damien was about to say some choice words, Tim turned to the side and retched. Damien's brief thought of thanking Tim for his consideration was thrust from his mind when he saw the puke was black and shiny. "Tim?" Dick, back to normal, held Tim's face up in both his hands. There were tears streaming down Tim's cheeks, and a small dribble of that black puke ran down from his mouth. "Hey," he croaked, and Damien could see the puke on his teeth. It was years of practice that let Damien swallow down the bile that rushed to his mouth at the sight. Tim started. "That tasted so fucking rancid. I'm so going to go brush my teeth. Then buy myself a new toothbrush. Then test whatever that is." He gestured to the puddle on the floor. "Do you want to fill me in on what happened while I do that, or after?" "I'll test it," Jason interjected. "You brush your teeth and then shower, 'cause you're a fucking rake. Then, while that's processing, we're gonna have a family meeting. Dick, keep B busy until then, so he doesn't start pestering Tim till he bolts. Damien, you make sure Tim doesn't bolt." "I'm not going to." "Don't lie to me." Tim just shrugged. "Worth a shot." Damien was wondering when exactly the two red sheep of the family started to get along, but that was a question for later, when he couldn't hear Bruce coming down to the cave. Tim turned to him. "Would you like to escort me out of here now, or are we going to ruin Jason's plan?"
"Follow,"
Damien said, grabbing Tim's arm and helping him stand. The boy was surprisingly stable on his feet, as he stood and followed Damien through the labyrinth that was the Batcave. They hid, waiting until they heard Bruce talking to Dick to make their escape. Damien watched Tim as he brushed his teeth, and listened for any escape attempts as he showered. When Tim had dried off and dressed, Damien led him back down to one of the family rooms, where Dick, Bruce, and Jason were already sitting. Tim took a seat next to Jason, and Damien took his next to Dick, and immediately Tim took control of the room in a way Damien could only ever manage with a blade. To be fair, Tim's voice was just as sharp. "It's rather clear that you all have questions for me, and I'm willing to answer them, but I'm gonna need an explanation first. What happened on patrol, and how did we get here? I'm not going to answer a single one of your questions until I feel I've been fully caught up." Damien looked around, before quickly deciding to answer Tim's question himself.
3 nights ago on patrol, we were all struck by a magic user's spell. Our minds remained present, but our bodies went back to the age when we last felt safe."
He recounted how far they had all gone back, recounted how Tim fell and fell asleep, and how they'd spent the last 3 days taking shifts to watch his vitals.
"Any questions?"
Tim thought for a moment. "Did anyone collect a sample of the smoke?"
"Yes, but it hasn't been fully condensed yet, so we have yet to run any tests or put it in the database."
"All right then." Tim took a deep breath. "What were your questions?"
"Yes,"
Damien started.
"Do you feel safe here?"
"No."
"Why not?"
Tim raised an eyebrow. Half the people in this room have made attempts on my life. One person here orchestrated tests with no warning, teaching me to be ready for anything and not trust anyone. He gave Bruce a side eye. His lessons suck. You, he turned to Dick, are unpredictable. You're kind, and I love you for it, but when you're angry, you scare me. A little more than you should. I'm sorry,
Don't be. But I feel the need to point out that you didn't go back to before you met us. You didn't go back at all, Tim.
Well, Tim started. You know how both my parents are alive and well?
Lucky you,
Jason snorted. Tim elbowed him in the ribs. If my memory serves me correctly, they are currently in Tehran. They'll be in Dubai for their anniversary, and return home in about 2 months. They've been gone for 5 months already. Their escapades are not a newly developed hobby. I think we know better than most how dangerous Gotham can be, but trust me, it doesn't compare to the imaginings of a child who's been left alone for just a bit too long. No one knew how to fill the silence that followed. So, Tim continued, if there aren't any more questions, I can leave, right? There were protests from every corner of the room. The moment they died down, Damien broke his own bout of silence.
You must stay for the next 48 hours at least, so we can watch your health. If it worsens for one reason or another, and no one is there to help, you'll be out of commission for much longer.
Jason, Dimbo, you were just in a magical coma because you don't feel safe. You'll be lucky if I leave your side this week. Tim glared at him. Jason just smiled back, and after a moment Tim huffed. Fine, but I'm staying in the manor. Damien furrowed his brow. He thought that part went unsaid. Judging by Jason's reaction, it did not. You fucking kidding me? You're gonna make me stay here? I'm not making you do anything. You're going to try and stop me from getting WE work done, which just isn't in the cards for me after I dropped off the map for half a week. And here, you might actually need a break if I get any visitors. Jason turned to them, quickly realized that he was alone in his argument, and turned back to Tim. You're a devious little bastard. A sharp smile. I learned from the best. Damien could not sleep, which was weird. He was very well trained. He knew many meditation techniques to help him fall asleep, but the moment he finished the meditation, his thoughts returned full force. He was tired enough to want to sleep, so he knew he didn't need to burn energy. He did not have any injuries that were keeping him awake, and he was home. And home was safe. Damien was trained to wake at the sound of footsteps or the creak of a door. He was trained to be ready the instant he was awake. He was trained to be on guard, but when he was home, he didn't have to be. Damien took a long breath. As much as he wanted to avoid the truth, he knew why he could not sleep. Reluctantly, he stood up, quickly fixing his hair and making his bed, before slipping from his room and through the manor. Damien ambled down the stairs and into the guest wing, quickly locating Tim's room and opening the door. The alarm surprised him more than it should have. Within a moment, he saw Jason go from reading some book to standing at attention, and Tim go from sleeping in his bed to crouched beside it, holding a knife, the blade of which caught the light from Jason's reading lamp and reflected angrily in Damien's eyes. Damien thought about how quickly Tim responded in the negative when Damien asked whether he felt safe. Damien raised his palms and bowed his head.
I am unarmed. Check if you must.
Jason huffed. Tim? Almost reluctantly, Tim shifted into a more relaxed stance and reached for his phone. You can sit back down. I'll disable the alarm before it wakes anyone else up. Jason turned on the lights before returning to the armchair he had been previously inhabiting. The alarm shut off, and Tim put his phone down a moment later. The two of them stared at Damien, who stood vulnerably in the doorway. Well? Jason stared at him expectantly.
What do you mean by that?
You gonna come in, or what? Damien nodded, entering the room, and, upon habit, closing the door behind him. When he turned back to his brothers, who were still staring at him, he began to feel the anticipation he always got when there was no easy exit. "What is it, Damien?" Tim asked this time, sounding a tad more permissive than Jason. Damien's eyes flicked to the man, and before he could think, his mouth opened.
"I need to talk with Drake. You do not need to be here for this."
Jason almost seemed amused with him. "I'm not leaving," Tim sighed. "Damie, I'm assuming there's a reason you came to see me and not Dick?" Damien stilled.
The thought that Grayson could help did not occur to me."
Slowly, Tim nodded. "So you need help?" Damien was glad Tim didn't acknowledge his lapse in reasoning. "With what?" Blushing and feeling like the child everyone took him for, Damien said,
"I came across some trouble in regards to falling asleep."
Tim nodded along sympathetically, looking like he expected Damien to continue speaking. Damien snuck a quick glance at Jason, who, to his surprise, was not giving him a look of mockery. Damien chose not to process whatever emotion was on Jason's face, instead focusing on Tim's.
"I was simply wondering how you fall asleep knowing that all is not well."
A small, almost sad smile graced Tim's lips. "Practice, I guess, and patience. It's a waiting game, really. When you get tired enough, sleep is sleep. But getting to that point is never fun. Tea's always a good start. Valerian root is really good. Pair that with some chamomile and lavender, and you'll be out like a light. If that doesn't work, I'd recommend meditation. Whether that's actual meditation techniques and breathing exercises, or something meditative, like reading or drawing." Damien swallowed the lump in his throat.
"And what if someone has already tried those things? What should he do if they didn't work?"
Tim smiled. "Then he should go find his brothers, because, with them, he'll always have a warm place to sleep. Contact with people you regard as safe can be soothing. Do you think that would help you?" Not meeting anyone's eyes, Damien nodded.
"I would be much obliged if you let me rest here for the night."
Tim gestured to the bed, while he walked over to Jason. "Hop right in. We'll join you in a minute."
"We? What do you—"
Damien blinked at a rather inopportune moment, so he only saw before, Jason sitting in the armchair, and after, Jason being flipped onto the bed. Damien crawled in beside him, knowing how easy it would be to resign himself to not sleep for the night. He always found it easy to deny himself what made him happy. "Hey!" Jason protested. "I'm supposed to be making sure you don't croak." Tim crawled around to the other side of the bed, and suddenly Damien was surrounded. He had never been surrounded and at ease before. "You've been watching me all night. Haven't croaked yet." He liked the feeling. "Doesn't mean I should stop watching." Damien felt himself smile as his eyelids began to droop. "You're the one who's always bitching and moaning about how loud I snore. Just start performing CPR if I go quiet." Jason sighed. Tim snickered. Damien let out a small, contented sound as someone's fingers found their way to his scalp and gently combed through his hair. He was out a moment later. And that was the end of With the Safety On. Author's notes. I love this ending because now Damien has more people he can go to. Dick is great, but he's in the business of trying to fix Damien's problems. He cares about the boy and wants to help him, so it's understandable. But sometimes Damien just needs someone who's not going to ask questions. He found two someones. Smiley face. Wait, but when did Dick go back to? Before Tarantula. Damien, raised by assassins Wayne. It is completely ordinary to recognize what organs a person is missing simply from seeing their scars, and I shouldn't comment on it because this is a thing everyone else has noticed and is aware of as well. Dick. What? Damien. It is slightly less than completely ordinary to recognize what organs a person is missing simply from seeing their scars, and there is a slight chance that maybe I should say something about it. Maybe. Damien, would you like to be made aware of some questionably and oddly specific knowledge that's relevant to this obscure problem you have? Dick, trying to get Damien used to being a child, but still aware of how he was forced into maturity, and that he's a great resource because of it. Sadly. Dick. Small child is harmless. Must protect. Tim. That small child has made multiple meaningful attempts on my life. Dick. Small child doesn't know any better. Must protect. Damien. This reasonably sized child has made multiple meaningful attempts on Drake's life. Dick, slowly coming to the realization that Damien actually had the intent to cause harm and was fully aware of what he was doing. Oh. Tim. I talk in a very formal manner because I was raised to be shown off at galas and in boardrooms. I was also left alone for much too long and have no idea what should and should not be said aloud. Everyone. Yeah, we can tell. Reader's Notes.
This is Editing Evie. I have currently hijacked the reader's notes. I recorded some stuff, but I'm not too happy with it. And I thought of more things I wanted to say. Specifically, for a while, I've been meaning to say, whenever I'm reading, when I'm editing, I don't realize that when I was reading, I either, said the wrong character's name, or, I said the wrong word. And sometimes I, read things and I'm like, oh, that's not correct. But it's close enough, so I just run with it. And other times I'm like, that is completely incorrect, and people are going to get confused. And I just leave it in anyways, because I'm too tired to re-record. And also, because I record using the voice recorder on my phone, and that for some reason has a different audio quality than the editing app I use, which is what I'm using now, so you can totally tell the difference. And I did go back and fix one mistake earlier in this fic, which you probably heard the change. Yeah. And should I change it, or should I just go run with it when I make mistakes? Because if I change it, it's going to be bad audio quality. Anyways, thank you guys for listening. I really appreciate your support. As I'm reading this, I just reached 100 subscribers, which I'm really thankful for. And if the math works out and I finish it in time, hopefully tomorrow the 100 subscriber fic will be posted. If not, maybe a week from tomorrow. We'll see. We'll see. But thank you guys for reading, and bye!